The next question I ask in the clip is whether there is a cycle-specific way of exercising. Research into women's physiology tells us that hormones are favorable for performance when the periods start. If you do not become pregnant, your body goes into a relaxed state and all of your energy systems are at your disposal for exertion. In general, low hormone phases are great for training based on the research. Studies also show a reduced reaction time, neuromuscular coordination, and manual dexterity during the premenstrual and menstrual phases, which might make certain types of movement more appropriate at this time in the cycle. I wanted to know Courtney's professional opinion on whether or not she prescribes cycle-specific movement, and I loved her response. Have a listen.
So I wanted to chat a bit about, because I get a lot of questions. I don't know if you're the same, if you get a lot of questions about this, and before we started the recording today, you kind of alluded to this a little bit. You kind of gave me a bit of your perspective on the response to this question. But cycle syncing, is there a right way to exercise throughout the cycle? Is there a certain type of movement that we should be doing during menstruation as people with endo versus in the luteal phase or the follicular phase? And if you have a unique, controversial, whatever opinion, we want to hear it.
We'll talk about that. I think we could break this up into the two types of people. So
Mhm.
if we're thinking about cycle syncing for the general population, endo's not a problem, and you're just interested generally in hormonal training, there's actually quite a bit of controversy around this because there's a lot of people that say there are parts of your cycle where you will favor certain types of training because hormonally that means you're able to utilize energy well, you've got higher levels of energy, your performance is going to be better, you probably feel a little bit better. And then there's other times of your cycle where that's like not the case at all. And you're like, I could not think of anything worse than heavy lifting today. And that is definitely a thing. However, there's also a lot of research that shows that people and general clinical experience that people respond very differently to that. And I've tried to do that before in my previous years of clinical practice where I've said, this is what you need to do in your first part of your phase. This is your second part. This is ovulation. And it's like opposite for them. And they're like, I can't do this. Like it feels really, really opposite to what I should be doing. And it is very individualized to the person because everything feeds into your life. Like it's not just about your hormones. You've got recovery, you've got work-based stuff, you've got stress, everything. So, and even just in general, that will feed into your training. So for me, I don't love that concept of like, you should be doing this. I think it's more about like being in tune with your cycle, understanding what it means, and then looking at like what I actually do fit that model of lift heavier in your low phase, in your low hormone phase, which is like your first like 1 to 14 days or 12 even. And then in the second half, I'm going to do more like lower intensity stuff, maybe more volume and not like as heavy, things like that. So that could be generally you. Now, if we're going over into the endometriosis space, then that looks very different because now we're thinking more about like, when am I typically going to have pain? That's generally the problem. We're really using your cycle to moderate your training load, preempting pain and looking at what do we need to do so that that doesn't flare up or cause us more problems. So generally that looks like ovulation just before the period where things are just like not going well. That's really your higher levels of pain. You're probably going to have a little bit more inflammation then. So I usually recommend that is where we need to do everything that is more like down regulation. So that's going to be like no heavy lifting, not in the gym, or at least not in the early phases of when you're trying to navigate this. Because if you're adding load to an already loaded system and everything's going to inflame, it's going to flare up. So we have to preempt that. We have to go like, we're doing yin yoga, we're doing daily walks, we're calming the system. When that period finishes, that as in those couple of days where that is in your cycle, then we can go back into loaded exercise and build the strength that we need to. So that generally is what the programming looks like. How do we change the program in the month so that this is where I do my strength training and I'm pretty good at it. This is where I really need to focus on more like restorative movement, down regulation in preparation for what would be pain. These are the strategies I use if pain flares up. Then once that finishes, I move back into my strength training program, do that. And then when my period comes or pre that, I'm going to do the same sort of thing. So that way we're actually giving the body a really good chance to deal with all of the loads.
Briefly for the listeners, this is something that you alluded to a little bit. If you are a cycling woman, you're getting those cyclical shifts in your hormones. Courtney you alluded to like earlier on that when you have your period and all of your levels drop, all of your hormone levels drop, your estrogen, your progesterone, generally, if you're a healthy female, this is a good time for doing these types of movement that require a lot of energy, right? I think you alluded to that a little
Yeah.
bit in the beginning.
Yes.
But it's quite the opposite. Again, something that you alluded to with endometriosis, because very often menstruation is one of the most painful, high inflammation phases of the cycle. So I thought that was great that you mentioned it really has to be individualized,
Mm.
right, from person to person. Okay, great. I might scrap that because I don't know if that had any place in this conversation. But I did want to ask you, Courtney, you mentioned strategies during flares.
Yeah.
Again, like with anything, I'm assuming strategies for when flaring must be individualized, but do you have any quick tips or could you share a little bit about that, what that might look like?
Yeah, so we every person that I work with has like we go through options to try when
Okay.
your pain is high or what is possibly feeding into a pain flare. So deep glutes and pelvic floor tension feed into a lot of pelvic flares. And so generally there's a couple of exercises that I work with that are release-based work that looks like if you have a flare, do these exercises and see if it changes or it reduces the intensity or the duration of how long that lasts. We're looking at are the tension in the muscle groups feeding into that area. It could be that we're looking at what's your nervous system doing at that time. Like, have you just copped so much stress? You've maybe done a hardcore workout because you felt like maybe you felt good and you get a bit
Mm,
excited, and then you do something too
that's
much and
fair.
your body goes, sorry, this is too much.
Yeah.
And do we need to go, okay, actually, you did a little bit too much. We need to down regulate a little bit. And is that something that we can do breath work with? Is it more like a hobby that you do that's quite like, I kind of think about like, those activities that you do that you're like, oh, this feels nice.
You
Like
feel
I just
good.
feel really happy and joy and chill. Those are the type of things that we're looking for. Is it like weighted blankets, heat packs can be a down regulator at times. That's like something that why we tend to navigate towards heat packs as well. Um, Lots of different things. So we talk about what that looks like for each person because some people love meditation and they're like, I love it. Some of them are like, I couldn't think of anything worse. Like I can't sit there and all I do is think about everything in my life and it's problematic and I can't do it. So that is not a down regulation exercise for someone who doesn't like it, but something maybe that's a bit more like guided yin yoga where you're holding things and they're cueing you to breathe and there's a bit more purpose behind each thing might be really beneficial. Someone might just be like, that doesn't work for me. I do breath work and then I have a hot bath and then I spend time with my partner. I do the stretches that you gave me or the release exercises and that feels really good. So those are the kind of things that we look at, like what are your personal strategies that help you right now in the moment, because there's not a lot that you can really do once it happens. But over time, when you start to build these things, like a toolbox, I call it, and you've started retraining muscles and addressing every other thing that feeds into the pain, the flare is usually like in response to something that you've done that's like, oh, I know I did this hike with my friends and like I probably shouldn't have, but I had a pain flare. And okay, what do we like? We know that you're going to do this. We know that we need to do your strategies before you go on the hike and maybe after. So we give the body a chance to like relax pretty much straight away so that it doesn't kind of keep adding load. It's funny that you just brought that up about your client because generally sitting is going to put a lot of tension on muscles that are quite tight already.
Right.
So like the pelvic floor and the glutes all attach into that area. And
Right.
now you've sit down and you've got to put the back of you at length and stretched. And if they're not good at the lengthening movement, which we talked about earlier with its muscular function, it will pull on that area and create a lot of irritation at the joint. So if it's not something that's come from maybe surgery, there's definitely a potential muscular component that could be irritating that and causing more issues. I see a lot of like hip flexor tension and tightness and pain as well flaring up from sitting too long.
Right.
Generally, any stagnant posture is not going to be great. Our body doesn't like being in one position for so long. We're designed to move around. And so if you're not doing that in general, it is also probably not the best, but that's also something that becomes quite challenging because you're generally going through like laying on the couch and in bed for long periods of time because you're in so much pain. It's like this
Yeah.
cycle it's a really hard cycle to get out of if you have no idea where to start or what is even the problem. So
Yeah.
definitely, I mean, avoid sitting for long periods of time. I would definitely recommend that.
Yeah, you read my
Uh,
mind. I was just thinking that too. It's like not great to be sedentary in a seated position or laying for too long, but then when you're living with a chronic inflammatory condition, sometimes it's unavoidable or it poses
yeah,
a bit of a barrier to being more active, even if you uh really would like to be, right? Even if you would really like to be. So
yeah,
you had mentioned, down regulation exercises, and you had mentioned various types of yoga and certain stretches just to kind of like wrap up that response to that question, right? In terms of
yeah.
strategies for flaring. Okay, amazing. That was really, really helpful. Okay. I feel like you've probably answered this question in some way, shape, or form. I don't know if there's like a way to streamline it a little bit, or if you feel like there's nothing else to add, maybe, we could just skip to the next question. But top tips in general for moving your body with endometriosis. I know that that's a loaded question as well.
Uh, um, my I use this term a lot in my practice called symptom threshold, which
Ah,
is
okay.
like
Tell us.
I think a really cool thing to understand is what level of any movement can you actually tolerate just before you hit symptoms? And that would look like pelvic pain, mostly it's pain. It could be back pain, hip pain, pelvic pain. Sometimes it's leaking or pelvic floor issues or tension through the pelvic floor or whatever that might look like for you. Whatever your symptoms are, what is the level that you can do before that flares up? And that we need to work under that initially and teach the body everything under that. And then we can push the threshold higher. So if anyone who's like, what is the top tip? If I had to give you one thing, I'd be like, figure out what that actually is. Start really, really, really low and just do that and then slowly make changes. And that might be just one thing that you make change to. So if you can go for 10-minute walks and you can only do 3 days a week because the fourth day tips you over, then do 3 days a week and do it for a whole cycle, get your body used to it, and then go 3 days a week for 12 minutes. And that will push your threshold up. So like that's the best way to start moving in any way, like without any support from someone like myself who is like knows how to probably train you in the way that you need. But those types of things are going to be extremely helpful. And if you don't even know how to start that, I would really recommend reaching out to someone who can support you because there is actually so much we can do to teach the tissues to do things that isn't really scary. So I get a lot of people that initially inquire, they're all keen and they're on their initial session and I show them their first bit of their program and they say, this is actually so nice. I was really scared you were
Oh,
going to
good.
give me this huge exercise program that I can't do because I'm an exercise physiologist and people are like, oh, she's going to give me this program. And it's like, yeah, we're doing like 5 or 10 minutes of things that are super specific. Half of it's laying on the floor. We're incorporating breath work. We're teaching your muscles how to relax. Like that's structured movement every day that you can follow, but it's really tailored to what your body needs. So like you don't actually need all of these, like don't go to the gym for 45 minutes. You're not going to be able to do it. So start something super, super small and don't be bothered by the fact that it is super small because people feel silly doing a 3-minute walk. But in reality, a 3-minute walk every day for a week and then a 4-minute walk the next week, every day for a week could actually be what gets you to walking for an hour every single day. So, the small, really small steps are so important and just be okay with that. Figure out where you're at and just don't increase drastically. Do the same thing for a month, do the next thing, do the same thing for a month. We have to see what happens with your cycle, what changes happen, and monitor it that way.
Let's say somebody comes to a specialist like you and they're already quite well versed in movement. Maybe they're already hitting up the gym 3, 4 times per week. Maybe they have a reasonable amount of muscle on their body.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that somebody like that could maybe be doing a form of movement that isn't really moving them in a positive direction in terms of inflammation and pain? And are there scenarios where somebody like that might need to take a step back, kind of retrain
Mm,
the muscles or down regulating some of the things that you've already talked with us about? Does that exist? Is that something?
yeah.
Yeah,
Really common, actually. I see a
really.
lot of that because I tend to attract a lot of like the people who are more wanting to be more like, let's say, everyday athletes. So they want to do like running and they want to do like F45 classes or
Okay.
functional fitness. I don't know if you have F45 over there, but
We
like
do.
CrossFit
Yeah.
and pool, yeah. Or maybe they're training for a sport and they have endometriosis, and it's like, I still just do it and like I can manage it okay, but I have all this pain. Generally, we can do a lot of still addressing muscular balance issues and looking at how their muscles are recruiting. If they're doing a lot of core-based exercise, we need to teach them how does that core work impact tension, that maybe they're doing too much contraction of particular movements, and we need to prioritize a little bit more like teaching the length side of things. So how you use your core in exercises becomes really hard, a little bit hard to explain without really running through like a whole workshop on that. But generally they'll be anything with like lots of gripping and squeezing and tension is probably feeding into things. It might be that they need like strategies outside of their programming so that we can go, okay, well, we know that these days in your program that you're already following tend to cause flare-ups. Is it the fact that you need some sort of like down regulation exercise at some point either side of that program? Does it look like maybe the exercise choice in that program? So squatting, any quad dominant movements tend to cause more issues because a lot of issues are more that they need more strength through the glutes and the hamstrings like better. So if we're trying to train movements that are favoring more quads initially, that will cause more tension and create postural changes and pulling in certain directions. So that could be problematic, that we need to go, okay, instead of this, we need to hinge instead of squat for a while and teach you a bit more of that mechanics. It could be that their technique in those exercises isn't optimal, so that they're favoring certain parts of the movement because that's their pattern of compensation for muscles that don't lengthen. It could be something like that. It could be the complete volume of everything and whether or not they're actually eating enough food at the same time or the right nutrients, and inflammation is loading up because they're excessively exercising, not in a bad way, because it's usually that awkward window of you're doing things 4 times a week, maybe it's not really overtraining, but if you're not nourishing well, it probably is overtraining.
Right.
And then you layer in stress and poor sleep on top of that, and you are in this state of excessive inflammation. It might be that we go, okay, you do really well at 4 days a week of this, but let's add in a restorative exercise so your body can be like, a little bit. Things like that. So there's a lot of strategies I put into play. Like if someone says I'm training already, I don't cut their training. I say, add these rehab exercises in, do your program.
Okay.
Let's see what changes happen. And then if we need to adjust your program after, we'll change the programming.
Are there types of movement that are like less ideal for somebody with endometriosis?
This depends on where you are in the journey, I think.
Okay.
So I think that like people can do high impact training, they can do heavy lifting and all the things. I've had plenty of clients go from yoga to now running a marathon. And we've worked together for like 2 years to get there. But we've created a body that can now tolerate different levels, and we've pushed the symptom threshold higher. If I saw her early on, I would be like, you are not doing any high impact exercise or heavy lifting because it will cause you way too many problems and lots of inflammation. So some people can do that. I have seen some people that their bodies are just their stage 4 endometriosis. Everything's like on and they're not in any place to do any of that. And like, we're not even talking about goals around that yet because it might actually never be possible for some people. It is unfortunately a condition that we really can't do. We can't get rid of completely. We can't solve every problem. And there is the odd chance that it might not be that for you. But there's a lot of things we can do to get you closer to that or have a little bit more feelings around things like that. But I would never say that there's some things that you should just rule out completely for the rest of your exercise history because you have endometriosis.
Okay.
Because I think it's actually just more about like, can your body tolerate that? Because our bodies are really designed to adapt and change. And exercise supports so many things.
Right.
I can't really say that exercise is bad for anything. Like there's always a positive component. It's just about what way you choose to do it at where you are in that journey.
For sure. Amazing. Okay. You did at some point in the response to the previous question mention that, if I heard you correctly, that core and maybe like squats are more likely to trigger flares.
Yeah, okay. So core work definitely does initially
Yeah.
because the deeper core tissue, the pelvic floor one is part of your core, and that is always tight in everybody with endo. I've never seen anyone that
Okay. Interesting.
doesn't have a tight pelvic floor.
Okay.
And that's because it's part of the central system that is impacted by central nervous system. It's also like a gripping, squeezing muscle, like when you're in pain.
Right.
It's also, there's research has shown us that it's like one of the dominant muscle groups when like women are exposed to images that look like let's say threatening. So it's
Mm.
like a bit very emotive response muscle, shall
Yeah.
we say.
Yeah.
So if we're trying to squeeze an already tight muscle, it's gonna like it gets like spasmy and causes
Mm.
problems. So any core exercise where we engage your core is gonna exacerbate that. Especially if you haven't then taught it to relax after. So deep pelvic floor and the deeper core layer generally are problematic. Squats are a hard one because they trigger a lot of things because of the way the hips and the pelvis have to move through that movement. So we have to have really good hip range of motion, which requires a lot of internal and external range of motion. And the pelvic floor feeds into the hips. So if that's really tight, then the hip socket becomes really tight. And going into a squat can be problematic. And you might notice that you can't get deep in your squat. Maybe your hips pinch in the front. That's a pretty good indicator that you've got poor muscular balance. Maybe you arch your back quite a lot. So the way you get into the squat, your body has developed patterns that aren't maybe optimal for muscle function. And that can sometimes flare up the pain and irritation, kind of like that tug of war analogy. So, but some people can squat really well and others don't. Some people might deadlift really well and others don't. Some people might love lunges and other people don't. Generally, those functional lower body movement exercises, anything lower body,
Mm.
if you haven't done the preparation work for it, will tend to flare up any pain.
Is there some
Yeah.
kind of like physical sign that your body could give you, or maybe, we know if it's presenting in this fashion, we know that it's alluding to a specific problem in your core or in your pelvis or in your hips or something
Yeah.
like that. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Like, how do I know if it's my pelvic floor's tight?
Sure. Yeah.
Like, would it be tight? I don't know. What would my body tell me? So, the pelvic floor, I think, is a really good one because it has some symptoms that you are like, oh, yeah, this is tight. And
Oh,
you can
okay.
pretty much like, so imagine like your pelvic floor, its job is to let things in and let things out at the most appropriate times. So
Right.
if you have a hard time getting anything in or getting anything out, it is probably quite tight. So think like tampons, menstrual cups, penetration, bowel movements, difficulty with letting urine actually begin flowing or fully emptying. All of those are like pretty big red flags that something's like blocking the hole and it's not so great. Really problematic. Any pelvic pain is usually associated with pelvic floor tension and tightness outside of endometriosis as well. So I have a lot of clients that are just pelvic floor tightness clients that are pelvic pain that don't have endometriosis, but they have those same signs like urgency, irritation, frequency. You go to the toilet and you have this massive urge, and then all of a sudden you go and there's nothing in there, and you're like, what? I thought there was going to be all this pee. But like that's a sign that like everything is irritated and not feeling amazing. So when we think about that, like that gives out like I think quite a couple of like a lot of people will probably be like, oh yeah, that is me right now. I
Mhm.
can fully appreciate that. Um, so they're pretty big red flags for tension. I mean, you can always go and have an internal check done, and people like touch through your pelvic floor, and
Yeah.
a physiotherapist. I think you're called. Do you call them physical therapists over there?
Yeah, physiotherapists.
Physiotherapist? Are they physios?
Or
I'm no physical therapist. Whatever. They do internal pelvic floor work and they'll assess. I think the states is
well,
physical therapy.
yeah, when I had it done, I went to a pelvic floor physiotherapist.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah,
So they'll do like the internal check and assess.
right.
That can tell like that's your gold standard for checking tension, really. But all of those other signs generally are. Another really big one is a lot of people will try and do pelvic floor exercises and they'll squeeze and lift their pelvic floor in the attempt of like, I'm leaking urine sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes.
Mm.
And I don't know why. I try and squeeze my pelvic floor and I can't really feel anything. Like it doesn't really squeeze. And it's because it's already so tight. So think about like, if I'm doing a bicep curl and I'm like this, and then I'm trying to do more, and I'm like, I don't really feel like I can go very far. It's because you're already there. You're already at the end of
Mm.
the range. So generally, those people need to actually focus more on the relaxing and then they'll be able to squeeze and lift
Mm.
rather than just squeezing all the time. So if that's something that you experience and you're having troubles getting anything in or getting anything out, and you have bladder irritation and urgency, and you've got really bad tailbone pain and like low back pain, which is all associated with endometriosis anyway, but that's a really big red flag for pelvic floor tension. That's actually something that I think is also really important to understand, is that generally pain on entry is going to be something that's a little bit more like pelvic floor related, because it's like you're having that like I'm scared,
Right.
like
Right.
closing off feeling, or it's quite tense and the muscle isn't flexible enough to let anything in. Deeper penetration pain, that is probably going to be something maybe more related to lesions, or it could be that it's tension in the deeper parts of the pelvic floor as well, so a little bit harder to navigate. But if there's a pelvic floor component to it and you start doing a lot of like relaxing and lengthening and mobility work through the pelvic floor and everything else that feeds into it, that on entry pain will slowly improve, and so will some of the deeper penetrative pain. That on the, if you had like a nodule there and that's still there, then that's probably something that you could explore a little bit further with your specialist, and in a sense of like, do I need to get this removed or what this is.
Right.
However, if we are experiencing any form of pain with insertion or penetration, your brain will go into like that response of like, I don't like this. So it's going to preempt that to happen. And you will have that pelvic floor like reaction of closing off, which will then make it harder. So even if you were to like go and get everything removed, you may still have that response of like closing up and tensing in preparation for it, because you're like, I feel like it's going to happen and I'm nervous.
Yeah.
Like it really does require a lot of relaxation in the body for you to not have that response. But that is also a lot easier to untrain, because once you learn about it and you relax it, and then you start to have pain-free intimacy, then you'll start to have a bit more confidence in it, and you won't feel like it's going to happen every time. And then that response sort of changes. So there are ways around it, but yeah, the pelvic floor tension or dysfunction can come about just from like pain from insertion anyway, as well as everything from the muscular side of, its impact, the effect of endometriosis. If there are, I do actually have a like a pelvic floor tension webinar, like presentation that I did a while ago, that is like how to get started on your pelvic floor. That's just like a recording and a recording of a workshop that I did with like some home exercises to do, which if someone's really struggling to navigate where to go and how to start, and they have no idea and they're not really committed, they don't want to commit to anything because they're just nervous if it's going to work, that's a really good place to start to learn a little bit more about the actual exercises and action to take, and how it all feeds. It's specific for pelvic floor tension, but it's really appropriate for like the endometriosis side as well. So that might be helpful if anyone's here like,
Yeah.
hey, where do I go?
So, just three super quick little fun questions. What was the last thing you Googled?
What was the last thing that I Googled? Let me have a look at what it'll be in my search. Um, funny videos to watch on binge.
Amazing. Did you find some?
I don't think I did actually, because I was like, when you're like constantly scrolling and you just can't find anything to watch. So I was like, I'm going to just Google something. And I Googled, that
Amazing.
was my last Google.
Oh, fun. That's awesome. Okay, what's one thing that people find surprising about you?
Surprising about me. I think something that's surprising is that I don't have endometriosis. And most
Okay.
people wonder why I got into this. So yeah, I feel like that's always something that people are like, what? I thought you were so passionate about this. Why? How did you get into that? So yeah, not an endometriosis. I don't experience it. So I feel
Wow.
very grateful for that.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly are passionate about it. You can see the passion in your
Yeah.
responses to these questions. That's amazing. So no personal tie to endo, but there must be some
No,
fascination or
no,
interest.
pelvic floor issues previously.
Yeah, okay.
And I have experienced like pelvic pain from general muscle dysfunction and its impact on my ability to exercise. And it's the worst feeling in the world, because the barrier to training was the pain. And I'm like, this is so
Yeah.
hard. I want to actually train, but
Okay.
it's causing issues. So
So
now I'm like, this
relatable.
is what it feels like. Yeah.
Relatable for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay. You were stranded on a desert island. What three things would you have with you? What would you bring with you?
What would I bring with me if I was stranded on an island? I think I would probably suffer the most if I had no access to coffee. So if I could take a coffee machine and beans and have access to power. That would be my number one choice because I would be so bad without it. I think I would take like a blow up float in case I wanted to like paddle away or
Good idea.
enjoy the serenity of an island.
Probably a great way to
And
downregulate.
yeah, or maybe I don't know what I would take my third one. Maybe like something to do, but I feel like I don't really know what I would take. Maybe my dog.
Okay, fair.
Yeah, my pets.
Okay, cool. That's great. Those are great things.
I hope I don't get stranded because I'd probably be so bored.
Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And I'll see you in the next video.